Some wounds don't show on the skin. They live in the whispers of neighbors and the weight of shame carried alone. For 7 years, Clara Hartwell endured the cruelest label a small town could give: barren. In Red Bluff, that word meant more than childlessness. It meant she was cursed, unworthy, forgotten even by God. The townspeople turned away when she passed. She prayed each night for relief from the loneliness that pressed against her chest like a stone. Then Eli Morgan rode down from the mountains. He was a quiet man who'd buried his own heartbreak beneath years of solitude. Where everyone else saw a broken woman, he saw something different. He saw Clara. Could one stranger's kindness change everything? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe. Tomorrow's story will stay with you long after it ends. Red Bluff sat in a valley where the prairie met the foothills, a town of perhaps 300 souls clinging to respectability in 1887. The main street ran straight as a rifle shot, between 2 rows of false-fronted buildings that tried to look more substantial than they were. Dust settled on everything during the dry months, turning the world the color of old bones. When the wind blew, it carried the smell of sage from the hills and livestock from the pens behind the livery stable. Clara Hartwell's general store stood on the corner of Main and Church Street, a sturdy building her father had constructed from timber hauled down from the mountains 20 years before. The sign above the door still bore his name, Hartwell Mercantile, painted in letters that had faded from black to grey. Inside, the store smelled of coffee beans, leather, tobacco, and the linseed oil she used on the wooden floors. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, stocked with everything a frontier town might need: flour and sugar in barrels, bolts of calico and muslin, tools and rope, patent medicines and lamp oil. She opened the store each morning at 7 and closed it at 6 days a week. Sunday, she kept for church and the quiet maintenance of her small cabin at the edge of town. Her routine rarely varied. She was 32 years old and had lived in Red Bluff her entire life, except for 1 year at a finishing school in Denver that her father had insisted upon. That year had felt like exile. She'd returned home the day after graduation, grateful to be back among familiar things. Her marriage to Thomas Hartwell, a distant cousin who'd come west to work the silver claims, had lasted 3 years before typhoid took him. They'd been cordial to each other, even affectionate in their way, though Clara suspected neither of them had felt the grand passion that novels promised. Thomas had wanted children. So had she. Month after month, year after year, her courses came with the regularity of the seasons, and each time Thomas's disappointment grew a little heavier, a little harder to carry. When he died, Clara grieved honestly. She'd lost a companion, a partner in the daily work of living, but she'd also felt a shameful flicker of relief. Relief that she'd no longer see that monthly disappointment in his eyes. Relief that she could stop counting days and holding her breath and hoping for something that apparently wasn't meant to be. The shame of that relief had haunted her for months after his funeral. Thomas's brother, William, had married 6 months after Thomas died. His wife gave birth to their first child within a year, then a second, then a third. Each birth announcement felt like an indictment. The math was simple enough for the town to calculate. William and Martha Brennan Hartwell clearly had no difficulties in that department, which meant the problem had been Clara all along. Martha Brennan, no relation to William's wife, but a woman who'd taken the shared surname as some kind of cosmic endorsement of her opinions, led the Presbyterian Ladies' Auxiliary with an iron hand wrapped in Bible verses. She was 53, childless herself by choice according to rumor, and had made it her life's work to ensure everyone in Red Bluff understood their proper place in God's order. Clara's proper place, according to Martha, was somewhere between unfortunate and cursed. The whispers had started slowly. A comment here, a meaningful glance there. Then they grew bolder. Women stopped inviting Clara to quilting bees and church socials. When she walked past groups on the street, conversations would pause, resume in lower tones. Children were pulled away from her as though barrenness might be contagious. Only a few people remained kind. Doc Finley, who delivered half the town and had little patience for cruelty, disguised as righteousness. Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry and understood what it meant to be judged by people who knew nothing of your heart. And young Sarah Miller, a girl of 10 who still smiled at Clara and sometimes lingered at the store counter to talk about books and dreams. Clara's evenings followed their own rhythm. She'd close the store, count the day's receipts, enter the figures in her father's old ledger. Then she'd walk the 3 blocks to her cabin, past the church where lamplight glowed in the windows during prayer meetings she no longer attended, past the houses where families gathered for supper, where children's laughter spilled through open windows in summer. Her cabin was small but well built, set back from the road with a garden plot she kept planted with vegetables and herbs. Inside, everything was precisely arranged. The kitchen with its cast-iron stove, the sitting area with her mother's rocking chair and a lamp for reading, the bedroom with the quilt her mother had stitched, each patch a piece of fabric from Clara's childhood dresses. On the small table beside her bed sat a worn leather prayer book, its pages soft from handling. Pressed between the pages were dried flowers, columbine from the mountains, prairie roses, forget-me-nots from the creek bank. Each flower marked a prayer she'd offered up in desperate hope. Prayers for a child, prayers for purpose, prayers for relief from the loneliness that had become her constant companion. Around her neck on a thin gold chain, she wore her mother's wedding ring. Her own ring from Thomas sat in a drawer, but her mother's she kept close. It was a simple band, worn smooth by years of wear, and touching it reminded Clara that her mother had loved her father deeply, had created a home full of warmth despite the hardships of frontier life. That kind of love had existed once. Maybe it could exist again. But 7 years of whispers had worn down her hope like water on stone. She'd begun to believe what the town believed, that she was somehow incomplete, that God had marked her as unworthy of the blessings other women received so easily. Still, she maintained her dignity. She held her head high when she walked through town. She kept her store immaculate and her accounts honest. She extended credit to families who needed it and rarely pressed for payment when she knew times were hard. Her father's ledger was full of debts she'd quietly forgiven, though she'd told no one. That was between her and her conscience. At night, though, when the lamp was lit and the silence pressed close, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her isolation. She'd sit in her mother's rocking chair and let the tears come, quiet and steady, until she was empty. Then she'd open the prayer book and read the familiar verses, touching the dried flowers, remembering when hope had felt possible. She never prayed for a miracle anymore. She'd stopped believing in those. She prayed only for the strength to face another day, another week, another year of carrying this burden alone. She prayed for grace to forgive the people who'd turned her private sorrow into public shame. And sometimes, in her most honest moments, she prayed simply to understand why God had made her this way, why he'd given her a heart that longed to nurture and care, but denied her the means to do it in the way the world expected. Spring came to Red Bluff with reluctant warmth, the kind that promised much but delivered slowly. The cottonwoods along the creek began to bud. Calves appeared in the fields. The air smelled of mud and growing things. And Clara opened her store each morning, greeted the customers who still came, fewer than before, but enough to keep her solvent, and lived her quiet life of dignified solitude. She didn't know that everything was about to change, that a man named Eli Morgan was riding down from the mountains, with his own burden of grief, his own understanding of what it meant to be judged for circumstances beyond his control. That sometimes the people who understand you best are the ones who've walked through their own fire and emerged scarred, but not destroyed. All she knew was that another day had dawned, and she would face it the way she faced all the others, with grace, with dignity, and with the small, stubborn ember of hope that refused to die completely, no matter how hard the wind blew against it. The morning Eli Morgan rode into Red Bluff, the sky was the color of faded denim, and the air carried a hint of rain that never quite arrived. Clara was restocking the shelves with tins of peaches when she heard the unfamiliar sound of a horse's hooves stopping outside her store. She glanced through the window and saw a man dismounting from a rangy bay gelding, a pack mule trailing behind on a lead rope. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of hard work and a face weathered by sun and wind. His hair was dark with threads of silver, his beard neatly trimmed. He wore wool trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. On his hip hung a revolver in a worn holster, and across his saddle was a rifle in a fringed scabbard. He moved with the deliberate economy of someone accustomed to conserving energy, someone who'd learned that unnecessary motion was wasted motion. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. He removed his hat, revealing eyes the color of creek water, grey-blue and clear. He nodded to Clara with a courtesy that had become rare in her experience. "Morning, ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet, roughened by disuse, but not unpleasant. "I'm needing supplies if you've got them." "I do," Clara said, setting down the tin she'd been holding. "What are you looking for?" He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and read from a list written in careful block letters. "Coffee, flour, salt, sugar, dried beans, bacon, ammunition for a Henry rifle. Basic provisions for someone planning to stay in the backcountry for a spell." Clara gathered the items efficiently, wrapping them in brown paper, calculating the total in her head. As she worked, she was aware of him watching her, not in the way men sometimes did, with assessment or judgment, but with simple attention. He noticed the neatness of her store, the way things were organized with care. When their eyes met briefly, he didn't look away with discomfort or pity. He simply nodded again, as one person acknowledging another. "That'll be $4.30, Clara said, setting the wrapped packages on the counter. He counted out the coins exactly, then paused. "You wouldn't know of a place where a man could camp for a few days. Somewhere with water and decent grazing?" "The creek runs through public land about a mile east," Clara said. "Good grass there. Most folks don't mind if you're respectful of the property." "Much obliged," he said, gathering his purchases. He was almost to the door when it opened abruptly, and Martha Brennan entered with 2 other women from the ladies. Auxiliary, Constance Pritchard and Eleanor Sykes. They stopped short at the sight of the stranger, their eyes taking him in with that particular sharpness women develop when they've appointed themselves guardians of community standards. "Good morning, ladies," Eli said, stepping aside to let them pass. They moved into the store without responding, and Clara felt the familiar tightening in her chest that always accompanied Martha's presence. The 3 women made a show of examining fabric bolts, but their real attention was on Clara, waiting to see if she'd acknowledge them first, if she'd show proper deference. Clara had long since stopped playing that game. She turned to her ledger, entering the morning's sale. "Clara," Martha said finally, her voice carrying that tone of patient correction she used so often. "I'm surprised to see you're open this early. Given that you have so few obligations, one would think you'd take the mornings to reflect and pray." The words landed with practiced precision. "Given that you have so few obligations," meaning given that you have no children, no family, no real purpose. Clara's hand tightened on her pen, but her voice remained steady. "The store opens at 7, Martha. Same as always." "Of course," Martha said, moving to the counter with a spool of thread she had no intention of buying. "Though I do wonder who you're opening for. So many people have been taking their business to the new mercantile over in Copper Springs. They say the proprietor there is more blessed in his family life. People prefer to support businesses where God's favor is evident." Eli Morgan, who'd been halfway out the door, stopped. He turned slowly, his expression unchanged, but something in his bearing shifting. He walked back into the store and set his packages down on the counter. "Pardon me," he said to Martha, his tone perfectly polite, "but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you saying that God's favor can be measured by how many children a person has?" Martha drew herself up, ready to educate this stranger on matters of faith. "The good book is clear. Be fruitful and multiply. Those who cannot fulfill this commandment are, the good book also says, judge not, lest ye be judged." Eli interrupted gently. "And if I recall correctly, there's something in there about loving your neighbor as yourself. I may have been in the mountains a while, but I don't believe those verses have changed." A flush crept up Martha's neck. I don't believe we've been introduced, and I don't believe you understand the complexities of our community. You're right on both counts, Eli said. My name's Eli Morgan, and I don't understand why good Christian women would walk into a well-kept store run by a woman who's done them no harm and speak to her with such meanness. That's a complexity I've never quite grasped, and I've been trying to understand it for 46 years. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Constance and Eleanor looked at their shoes. Martha's face had gone from flushed to pale, but her voice maintained its authority. Mr. Morgan, you've just arrived in Red Bluff. You don't know the history here. You don't know what Clara Hartwell represents to this community. I know what I've seen in the last 10 minutes, Eli said. I've seen a woman running an honest business with courtesy and efficiency. I've seen 3 women walk in and offer her nothing but cruelty dressed up in Bible verses. And I know which one of those things the Lord I pray to would approve of. He gathered his packages again, touched his hat brim to Clara, and walked out. The bell chimed behind him, leaving a ringing silence. Martha turned to Clara, her eyes glittering. You see? This is what happens when you refuse to accept your place. You attract the wrong element. Drifters and mountain men who have no respect for decent society. Clara found her voice, though it trembled slightly. He showed me more respect in 5 minutes than you've shown me in 7 years, Martha. You can take your thread or leave it, but if you're going to shop here, you'll do it without commentary on my life. I most certainly will not shop here, Martha said, setting the spool down with deliberate force. And I'll make sure others know what kind of establishment you're running. Consorting with strangers, allowing them to speak disrespectfully to upstanding members of the church. The 3 women swept out, leaving Clara alone with the echo of their exit. She stood at the counter, her hands shaking now that the confrontation had passed. Through the window, she could see Eli Morgan loading his purchases onto the pack mule. He worked with patient efficiency, securing everything properly before mounting his horse. Just before he rode away, he looked back at the store. His eyes met Clara's through the window, and he gave a small nod. Not of pity, not of judgment, but of simple acknowledgement. One person seeing another. One survivor recognizing a fellow traveler. Then he turned his horse east and rode out of town at an easy walk, the pack mule following behind. Clara watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she touched the ring at her throat, feeling its familiar weight and warmth. Something had shifted in the last hour, though she couldn't name what exactly. A stranger had defended her, not because he wanted something from her, not because he pitied her, but simply because it was the right thing to do. She'd forgotten that such people existed. The rest of the morning passed slowly. A few customers came in, men mostly buying tobacco and nails, conducting their business with brief courtesy before leaving. No one mentioned the incident with Martha, but word would spread. It always did in Red Bluff. By supper time, the whole town would know that Clara Hartwell had allowed a drifter to speak rudely to Martha Brennan, had practically encouraged it by not immediately apologizing. Clara locked the store at noon and walked home for lunch. The sky had cleared to hard blue, and the sun was warm on her shoulders. Her cabin looked peaceful in the spring light, the garden plot showing the first green shoots of the peas she'd planted 2 weeks earlier. Inside, she made herself tea and a sandwich of bread and cheese. She sat at her small kitchen table and ate without tasting, her mind replaying the morning's events. Eli Morgan's words kept circling back, "I know what I've seen," as though that was enough, as though the evidence of his own eyes carried more weight than 7 years of town gossip. Who was he? A drifter, certainly. The kind of man who carried everything he owned on a horse and a mule. But there was something else there, too, an education in his speech, a courtesy that spoke of good upbringing, a moral certainty that couldn't have come from nowhere. And he'd been hurt. She recognized it the way one wounded animal recognizes another. Something in his eyes, in the careful way he moved through the world, spoke of old pain carried well. Clara washed her dishes and prepared to return to the store. Before leaving, she paused at her bedside table and opened her prayer book. The dried flowers shifted between the pages. She ran her finger over the columbine petals, blue as mountain sky, brittle with age. She didn't pray. Not exactly. She simply stood there for a moment, holding the book, feeling the weight of all those old petitions pressed into its pages. Then she closed it gently and walked back into the afternoon sun. When she reached Main Street, she saw him. Eli Morgan was riding back into town, but this time he turned down Church Street and stopped in front of her cabin. She walked quickly, curious and slightly alarmed. He dismounted as she approached, holding his hat in his hands. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I rode out to that creek you mentioned, and it's good land. But I got to thinking on the way, and I wanted to ask you something proper-like." "What's that?" Clara asked. "I noticed as I rode past your place that you've got a good stream running through your property, and the grass looks decent. I wondered if you might consider letting me camp there for a spell. I'd pay you fair rent and I'd be respectful of your privacy. I just figured that after this morning you might catch some talk if I'm camped nearby. So I wanted to ask direct, give you the chance to say no if you'd rather I kept my distance." Clara studied him. He met her gaze steadily, waiting for her answer without pressure or expectation. Most men would have simply made assumptions, would have camped where they pleased and considered it their right. This man asked permission and acknowledged the potential cost to her. "Why would you want to camp here specifically?" she asked. "Honestly? Because I like the way you run your store. Neat and organized, fair in your dealings. And because those women treated you poorly and you kept your dignity. That tells me you're someone worth knowing. But I understand if you'd rather not have a stranger on your land. Won't take offense either way." Clara felt a small warmth kindle in her chest, the ember of hope, long dormant, stirring to life. "You can camp on my property, Mr. Morgan. The stream's at the back, past the garden. There's good grass there and shelter from the wind. I won't charge you rent, but I'd appreciate it if you'd respect the boundary between your camp and my cabin." "You have my word on that," Eli said. "And I insist on paying something. Would $1 a week seem fair?" It was more than fair for campsite privileges. Clara nodded. "That would be acceptable." "Then I'm obliged to you," Eli said. He mounted his horse and rode around to the back of her property. Clara watched him go, then continued to her store, her mind turning over this strange new development. A mountain man was camping on her land. Martha Brennan would be apoplectic. The town would have even more to whisper about. And somehow, Clara found she didn't care nearly as much as she should have. That evening, after closing the store, Clara walked home in the long light of spring. When she reached her cabin, she could see smoke rising from behind the garden. Eli had made camp and started a fire. She could smell coffee brewing and something cooking. She went inside her cabin and moved through her evening routine, but her awareness kept pulling toward the back of the property, toward the presence of another human being sharing her small piece of land. She stood at her window as the sun set, watching the glow of his campfire. It had been 7 years since anyone had chosen to be near her. 7 years of isolation and whispers. And now a stranger had ridden down from the mountains and asked permission to stay. Clara touched her mother's ring, feeling its warmth against her skin. Then she opened her prayer book to a blank page at the back and wrote in careful script, April 14th, 1887, Eli Morgan arrived. Something has changed. I don't yet know what. She pressed no flower between these pages. The prayer was still being written, the answer still unfolding. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara went to bed, feeling something other than resignation. She felt curiosity. She felt possibility. She felt, against all reason and experience, a small flutter of hope. The next morning brought rain, a steady spring shower that turned the streets to mud and kept most people indoors. Clara opened the store as usual, though she expected few customers. She was surprised when Eli Morgan appeared just after 8, water streaming from his hat brim, a wooden toolbox in his hand. "Morning, Miss Hartwell," he said. "I noticed yesterday you've got a shelf in back that's leaning pretty bad. Thought I might fix it for you, if you're amenable. I'm fair handy with carpentry, and it'd be a shame to see all those goods come crashing down." Clara had been meaning to fix that shelf for months, but kept putting it off. "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking." "I'm offering," Eli said. "I appreciate you letting me camp on your land. This is just being neighborly. He set to work without waiting for further permission, removing the goods from the problematic shelf and examining the structure. Clara tried to focus on her morning tasks, but she found herself watching him work. He moved with practiced efficiency, identifying the problem immediately, a support beam that had cracked, and fashioning a replacement from a plank she'd had stored in the back room. "You've done this before," Clara observed. "Built my share of things over the years," Eli said, not looking up from his work. "Had a cabin up in the high country. Built it myself, piece by piece. It took the better part of a summer, but it was solid when I finished. Kept the wind out and the heat in, which is about all you can ask of 4 walls and a roof. You speak of it in past tense. Burned down 2 winters ago," Eli said simply. "Lightning strike during a storm. Lost most of what I owned. Wasn't much, but it was mine. I'm sorry." He shrugged, fitting the new support into place. "Things happen. You rebuild or you move on. I did some of both." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Clara at the counter, Eli on the shelf. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound that made the store feel separate from the rest of the world. "Miss Hartwell," Eli said eventually, "I hope you don't mind my asking, but those women yesterday, is that treatment common for you?" Clara stiffened slightly. "It's not your concern, Mr. Morgan." "I know it's not," he said. "But I've found that sometimes speaking truth out loud makes it easier to carry. You don't have to answer if you'd rather not." Clara set down the invoice she'd been reviewing. Something about his tone, matter of fact without pity, made her want to answer honestly. "It's been 7 years," she said quietly. 7 years since my husband died. We never had children. The town decided that meant I was cursed or broken or both. Martha Brennan appointed herself the chief voice of that judgment. Most people just followed her lead. Eli tested the shelf, making sure it was secure before responding. "People are quick to judge what they don't understand, and they're even quicker to turn someone else's private sorrow into public entertainment. I've seen it before. Hell, I've lived it." Clara looked at him sharply. "You?" He began reloading the shelf with the goods he'd removed, his movements careful and precise. "My wife died 8 years ago. She was with child. Neither one of them made it. We were living in a town not unlike this one, a little bigger maybe, but the same kinds of people, same kinds of judgments." "I'm sorry," Clara said, and meant it. "Folks in that town decided it was God's punishment. My wife was part Shoshone, you see. Her mother was white, her father was native. There were people who thought we shouldn't have married, that we were going against nature's law. When she died, they said it proved them right. Said God had made his opinion clear." Clara felt something break open in her chest, not pain, but recognition. "How did you bear it?" "Poorly at first," Eli said. "I wanted to burn that town to the ground. Wanted to make them hurt the way I was hurting. But that would have meant becoming the thing they accused me of being, something less than human. So instead, I packed what was left and rode into the mountains. Figured if people were the problem, I'd live where there weren't any people. And did that help?" "For a while," Eli said. "The mountains are good for thinking, good for healing, if you're willing to do the work. But eventually I realized something. Hiding from cruelty doesn't defeat it. It just gives it more room to spread. So I started coming back down, trading my furs and herbs, dealing with people again. And I made myself a promise. I wouldn't let their judgment make me small. I wouldn't pretend to be less than I am, just to make them comfortable." He finished restocking the shelf and stepped back to admire his work. "There, that should hold for a good long while." "Thank you," Clara said. "For the shelf, and for telling me about your wife." Eli nodded. "We carry what we carry, Miss Hartwell. The question is whether we let it break us or make us stronger. Seems to me you've been choosing strength, even if it doesn't always feel that way." He gathered his tools and headed for the door. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and pale light filtered through the clouds. "Mr. Morgan," Clara called as he reached the door. "Would you like to join me for supper tonight? Nothing fancy, just stew and bread. But it seems poor hospitality to have you camped on my land and not offer you a proper meal." Eli turned, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw a genuine smile cross his face. It transformed him, making him look younger, less weathered by grief. "I'd like that very much," he said. "What time should I come to the house?" 6 o'clock, Clara said. "I'll be there." After he left, Clara stood at the counter feeling oddly light, as though some weight she'd been carrying had shifted. She touched her mother's ring and thought about the conversation they'd just had. Eli, Morgan understood. Not in the abstract way Doc Finley understood, with kindness, but no real comprehension. Eli understood in his bones, in his scars, in the way he moved through a world that had judged him harshly and found him wanting. For the first time in 7 years, Clara didn't feel completely alone. The afternoon passed quietly. A few customers braved the rain to buy necessities. Clara worked on her accounts and thought about what to make for supper. She had venison in her cold cellar, potatoes and carrots from last year's garden, dried herbs hanging in her kitchen. She could make a good stew, the kind her mother used to make on rainy days. When 6 o'clock approached, Clara found herself nervous in a way she hadn't been in years. She'd set the table with her mother's good dishes, lit the lamp against the gathering dusk. The stew simmered on the stove, filling the cabin with savory warmth. Fresh bread cooled on the counter, and she'd made coffee strong enough to satisfy a man used to mountain living. Eli knocked precisely at 6. Clara opened the door to find him clean-shaven, his hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt she hadn't seen before. He held his hat in his hands and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Evening, Miss Hartwell," he said. "I brought you these. Thought you might like them." He handed her the bundle. Inside were fresh herbs, sage, wild mint, and something she didn't recognize, delicate and aromatic. "Mountain thyme," Eli explained. "Grows at high elevation. Good for cooking, good for tea, good for clearing the head when you're troubled." "I gathered it last summer. Thank you," Clara said, genuinely touched. "Please come in." They sat across from each other at her small table, and Clara served the stew. For a few minutes they ate in silence. The only sounds, the clink of spoons against bowls and the soft patter of renewed rain on the roof. "This is excellent," Eli said. "Best meal I've had in longer than I can remember." "You're kind to say so," Clara replied, "though I suspect after months of your own cooking, anything would taste good." "You'd be surprised," Eli said with a slight smile. "I'm not half bad with a Dutch oven. But there's something different about a meal cooked in a real kitchen and shared with company. Makes the food taste better somehow." They talked as they ate, small things at first, careful things. The weather, the quality of the year's runoff, the news from the last trading post Eli had visited. But gradually the conversation deepened. Eli told her about the mountains, about the patterns of seasons at high elevation, the wildlife, the silence that could be either blessing or curse, depending on your frame of mind. Clara found herself telling him about her father, about learning to run the store at his side, about the satisfaction of keeping neat accounts and fair prices, about her brief time in Denver and how out of place she'd felt among city people with their complicated manners and unspoken rules. "I think some people are made for cities and some for smaller places," Eli said. "Nothing wrong with either one, but trying to force yourself into the wrong place, that'll make you miserable every time." After supper, they sat with coffee, and Clara brought out a quilt she'd been working on, needing something for her hands. It was a star pattern in blues and creams, the pieces carefully cut and stitched. "That's beautiful work," Eli said. "My mother taught me," Clara said. "She said a quilt tells a story. Every piece of fabric comes from somewhere, means something. This blue here was from a dress I wore to church when I was 12. This cream was from kitchen curtains we had when I was small. Memory made tangible," Eli said. "I like that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out for her to see. It was a wooden cross, perhaps 3 inches long, carved from pale wood and worn smooth by handling. The craftsmanship was exquisite, simple but beautifully proportioned. "I carved this after my wife died," Eli said quietly. "Used wood from a pine that grew near our cabin. Worked on it for weeks, late into the nights when I couldn't sleep. Every stroke of the knife was a prayer, or maybe an argument with God. I'm still not sure which." Clara set down her sewing and reached out tentatively. "May I?" He handed her the cross. It was warm from being in his pocket, the wood silky under her fingers. She could feel the care that had gone into each cut, each subtle curve. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's a reminder," Eli said, "that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about deciding what kind of person you'll be when everything goes wrong. I keep it to remember that I chose to stay human, to stay decent, even when it would have been easier to let the grief make me bitter." Clara handed the cross back, understanding why he'd shown it to her. It was his version of her pressed flowers, his tangible record of prayers offered in darkness. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said. They sat together as the evening deepened, the lamp casting warm light against the gathering dark. Rain continued its soft percussion on the roof, and for the first time in 7 years, Clara's cabin felt like a home rather than a refuge from the world's judgment. When Eli finally rose to leave, he paused at the door. "Miss Hartwell, Clara, if I may, I want you to know something. What those people say about you, the names they call you, the judgment they pass, none of that defines who you are. I've known you less than 2 days, and I can already see that you're a woman of strength and grace. That's what matters. That's what's true." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Thank you, Eli, for seeing that. For saying it." He touched his hat brim and stepped out into the rain. Clara watched from her doorway as he walked around to his camp, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Then she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart full of something she was afraid to name. She went to her bedside table and opened her prayer book. On the page where she'd written about Eli's arrival, she added a single line, "He understands. God help me, he understands." This time she did press a flower, a sprig of the mountain thyme Eli had given her. She placed it carefully between the pages and closed the book gently, knowing that this entry marked something important, something that might finally be the beginning of an answer to all those desperate prayers. Outside, the rain fell steadily, washing the dust from Red Bluff, soaking into the earth, bringing growth and renewal. And in 2 separate places, a small cabin and a campsite by a stream, 2 wounded people lay down to sleep, each carrying a little less loneliness than they had the night before. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and strangely inevitable. Eli would come to Clara's store in the morning, usually just after she opened. Sometimes he'd help with tasks that required strength, moving barrels, unloading wagons when supplies arrived from Copper Springs. Other times, he'd simply sit on the porch whittling while she worked, his presence a quiet comfort. He brought her things from the mountains, not just herbs, but interesting stones, pieces of driftwood shaped by water, a hawk feather perfect and whole. Small treasures that cost nothing but spoke of attention, of someone who noticed what might please her. Clara found herself looking forward to his arrivals, found herself listening for his footsteps on the boardwalk. They talked easily now, the initial caution replaced by growing trust. Eli told her about his years in the high country, the brutal winters, the crystalline beauty of alpine meadows in summer, the peculiar clarity that comes from sustained solitude. She told him about her marriage to Thomas, trying to be honest about both its virtues and its limitations, about her father's death and the weight of running the store alone, about the slow erosion of hope that had accompanied month after month of disappointed expectations. "You know what the worst part is?" she said one morning as they sat on the store's porch, watching the town wake. "Not the fact that I never had children, not even the way people treat me. It's that I started to believe what they said, started to think maybe I really was cursed, that maybe God really had marked me as unworthy." "That's what cruelty does," Eli said. "It gets inside you, makes you doubt your own worth. I know, because I did the same thing. Spent months in those mountains wondering what I'd done to deserve losing Anna and the baby. Went through every mistake I'd ever made, every harsh word, every selfish act, trying to figure out which one had earned me that punishment. What changed? I watched a doe give birth one spring," Eli said. "She was maybe 50 yards from my cabin, in a little clearing. I heard her calling, went to see what the fuss was about. The fawn was coming wrong, breech, I think. She struggled for hours. I couldn't help, could only watch. Finally the fawn came, but it was dead. Had been for a while, I figure. The dough cleaned it anyway, kept trying to get it to stand. Spent a whole day with that dead baby before she finally left it and moved on. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. And I thought, did that do something wrong? Was she being punished? Or is death just part of life? And sometimes it comes whether we deserve it or not. Sometimes things just happen. Not because we're cursed, not because God's angry, but because we live in a world where not everything can be fixed with faith and good intentions. Clara absorbed this, feeling something loosen in her chest. So it wasn't my fault. No more than it was mine, Eli said. We carry the grief because that's what love costs. But the grief doesn't mean we did something wrong. It just means we're human. A week into Eli's stay, Doc Finley stopped by the store. He was a compact man in his 60s, with shrewd eyes and gentle hands that had delivered most of Red Bluff's children and closed the eyes of most of its dead. Clara, he said, I'm hearing talk about your house guest. He's not a house guest, Clara corrected. He's camping on my property and paying rent. That distinction may not matter much to Martha Brennan's faction, Doc said. They're saying you're keeping company with a drifter, that it's improper, that it confirms everything they've said about you. Clara felt the familiar anger rise. They'll say whatever they want to say. They've been doing it for 7 years. One more piece of gossip won't change anything. Maybe not, Doc said. But I wanted you to hear it from a friend, rather than having it thrown at you in the street. And I wanted to tell you something else. I like Eli Morgan. He's been helping Mrs. Chen with some repairs at the laundry, and he helped old Tom Mitchell fix his wagon axle when it broke. He's not asking for payment, just being neighborly. That's the mark of a decent man. I know, Clara said quietly. Doc studied her face. You're happy. I haven't seen you this way in years. I'm less alone, Clara said. That's not quite the same as happy, but it's better than I've been. Then don't let them take that from you, Doc said. Martha and her crowd, they feed on other people's misery. Don't give them the satisfaction. That evening, Clara mentioned the conversation to Eli as they shared another meal at her cabin. He'd become a regular presence at her supper table, and she'd stopped thinking of it as unusual. I can leave if this is causing you trouble, Eli said. I never meant to make things harder for you. No, Clara said firmly. I'm tired of making myself smaller to please people who'll never be pleased anyway. You've shown me that I don't have to live that way. Eli reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond a handshake, and the warmth of his palm against hers sent a shock through her entire body. You're a remarkable woman, Clara Hartwell, he said. I hope you know that. She turned her hand to clasp his properly, their fingers intertwining. I'm beginning to remember, she said. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, lamplight warm around them. Outside, spring was in full riot, trees leafing out, wildflowers blooming in the meadows, birds returning from their winter migrations. The world was renewing itself, and Clara felt that renewal in her own chest, like a dormant seed, finally receiving enough water and warmth to sprout. Later, when Eli had returned to his camp and Clara lay in her bed, she thought about the feeling of his hand in hers, about the way his presence had begun to fill spaces she'd thought would stay empty forever. It wasn't what she'd expected, wasn't what she'd prayed for all those years. But perhaps that was the nature of answered prayers. They came in forms you couldn't anticipate, couldn't plan for. She opened her prayer book and wrote, I am learning to hope again. It terrifies me, but I think I'm ready. She pressed another sprig of mountain thyme between the pages, its fragrance rising clean and sharp. Then she closed the book and blew out the lamp, lying in the darkness with a small smile on her face. In his camp by the stream, Eli sat by his fire, turning the wooden cross over in his hands. He'd come to Red Bluff planning to stay a few days, a week at most, before moving on to the next town, the next mountain range. But something had changed. Clara had changed everything. He thought about Anna, about the promise he'd made at her grave that he'd never forget her, never stop loving her. But he'd also promised her, in those last terrible hours, that he wouldn't let grief destroy him, that he'd find a way to keep living. Maybe this was what keeping that promise looked like. Not forgetting, but making room for something new alongside the memory. "I think I'm falling in love with her," he said quietly to the darkness, to Anna's ghost, to God if he was listening. "I don't know if I have that right. Don't know if I'm allowed. But it's happening anyway." The fire crackled, sending sparks up into the spring night. And Eli Morgan sat with his uncertainty, his hope and his fear, letting them all exist together without trying to resolve them. Some things, he'd learned, you just had to carry for a while before you understood what they meant. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Pete Jennings, who ran the town's main well, came to Clara's store looking worried. "Clara," he said, "we got a problem. The well's running low, real low. If this dry spell keeps up, we might have trouble come summer." "How low?" Clara asked. "Low enough that I'm thinking we need to talk to the town council. We might need to start rationing or find another source. I don't know, but I wanted to give you fair warning. If it gets bad, folks might start going to Copper Springs for their goods. Can't shop if they're using their water for drinking and cooking." After Pete left, Clara stood at her counter feeling the weight of this new worry. The store was her livelihood. If people stopped coming, she'd have no income. She'd have to close, maybe sell. And where would she go? What would she do? When Eli arrived an hour later, she told him about the well. He listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. "How many wells does the town have?" he asked. "Just the one main well for the whole town. Some people have private wells on their properties, but most folks rely on the town well. And where does it draw from?" "Underground spring, I think. My father said it had never run low in his lifetime." Eli was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Mind if I take a look at the geography around here? I've got some experience finding water in the mountains. Might be able to help." "You'd do that?" "Of course I would," Eli said. "This town may not have been kind to you, Clara, but it's still where you live. And whether they admit it or not, they need each other. Besides, I've got a personal interest in making sure you don't have to leave Red Bluff." He said it simply, but the implication hung in the air between them. Clara felt her heart beat faster. "Then yes," she said, "please. Any help you can offer would be appreciated." That afternoon, Eli began surveying the land around Red Bluff. He walked the ridges and valleys, reading the landscape with the eyes of someone who'd learned to see what most people missed. Clara closed the store early and joined him, curious about his process. "Water follows the path of least resistance," Eli explained as they walked. "But it also follows the geology. See how the rock layers tilt here? Water would flow along that grain. And these plants, willow and cottonwood, they only grow where water's close to the surface." He showed her how to read the signs, how to see the story the land was telling. It was like learning a new language, one written in stone and plant and the subtle shapes of hills. "There," Eli said finally, pointing to a ridge above the town. "If I were going to look for water, I'd start there. The geology looks right, and see those willows on the far side. They're getting water from somewhere. Could you dig a well there?" Clara asked. "Maybe. Would need to test the ground, see how deep we'd have to go. But it's possible." They stood on the ridge as the sun lowered toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The town spread below them, small and fragile-looking in the vastness of the landscape. "Thank you for this," Clara said. "For trying to help. We take care of each other," Eli said. "That's how we survive, by recognizing that we're all in this together, whether we always like each other or not." He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. "Clara, I need to tell you something. I came to Red Bluff planning to pass through. Spend a few days, resupply, move on. That was always my pattern. Never stay anywhere long enough to put down roots, never let anyone close enough to lose them." "And now?" Clara asked softly. "Now I find I don't want to leave," Eli said. "I find that I've put down roots without meaning to. And they've got your name written all over them." Clara felt tears threaten, but they were good tears, the kind that come from hope finally acknowledged. "I don't want you to leave either." "Then I won't," Eli said. "Not unless you ask me to. I'll stay here in Red Bluff. I'll help find this water. I'll face down whatever judgment comes. Because what I've found with you is worth more than an easy life in the mountains." He took both her hands in his touch warm and solid. Clara Hartwell, you are not barren. You are not cursed. You are not unworthy. You are strong and kind and beautiful, and any town that can't see that is blind with its own fear. I see you. I see exactly who you are, and I'd count myself blessed beyond measure if you'd let me stay. Clara's tears fell then, but she was smiling through them. "Stay," she said. "Please stay." They stood together on the ridge as the sun set, hands joined, looking down at the town that had judged them both so harshly. And in that moment, they made a silent pact, not just with each other, but with themselves. They would not be defined by other people's cruelty. They would not accept the labels others tried to force on them. They would write their own story, in their own words, and let the town think whatever it wanted. The wind rose, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and promising. And Clara Hartwell, who hadn't let herself hope for so long, finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her prayers were being answered after all. Not in the way she'd expected, but in a way that might prove even better. They walked down from the ridge hand in hand as darkness fell, and for the first time in 7 years, Clara didn't feel alone. She had Eli, she had hope, and tomorrow they would begin the work of finding water and proving to Red Bluff that miracles didn't always come from heaven. Sometimes they walked down from the mountains on 2 legs, carrying tools and determination and a willingness to help. The storm broke just as they reached Clara's cabin, rain falling in sheets that turned the world silver. They stood on her porch, watching the water stream from the roof, feeling the temperature drop as the storm settled in for the night. "I should get back to camp," Eli said, though he made no move to leave. "You could stay here," Clara said, then clarified quickly. "On the porch, I mean. You could sleep on the porch. There's a bench, and I have extra blankets. It's foolish to go out in this." Eli looked at her for a long moment. "People will talk. People already talk," Clara said. "Let them." So Eli stayed on the porch, wrapped in quilts Clara brought him, listening to the rain and the sounds of Clara moving about inside the cabin. And Clara lay in her bed, aware of his presence just beyond her door, feeling safer and less alone than she had in years. The rain continued through the night, soaking into the parched earth, filling the streams, renewing the land. And in the morning, when the sun broke through the clouds and painted everything gold, Clara and Eli would begin their work in earnest, not just to find water for Red Bluff, but to build a life together that honored both their pasts and their possible future. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, they simply rested in the knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious, another soul who understood, who saw, who stayed. The bundle of mountain herbs sat on Clara's kitchen table, fragrant with promise. The wooden cross nestled in Eli's pocket, warm against his heart. And between them, invisible but growing stronger every day, was something neither had dared hope for, a second chance at love, at life, at becoming more together than either had been alone. Outside, the rain fell steadily, washing away the dust of years, preparing the ground for new growth. And inside their separate but connected spaces, 2 wounded hearts began, very gently, to heal. Over the following days, word spread through Red Bluff about the well running low. The town council called a meeting, and Pete Jennings gave his report. The situation was serious, but not yet critical. They had perhaps 6 weeks before rationing would become necessary, maybe 8, if they were careful. Eli attended the meeting uninvited, standing at the back of the church hall where the council gathered. When the floor opened for comments, he stepped forward. "Name's Eli Morgan," he said to the room at large. "Some of you know me, most don't. I've been camping on Clara Hartwell's property for a couple of weeks now. Before that, I spent 8 years living in the high mountains, and I learned a thing or two about finding water. If you're willing, I'd like to help." Councilman Richard Beecham, a barrel-chested man who owned the largest ranch in the valley, squinted at Eli. "What kind of help are you talking about?" "I think there's a good chance of finding water on the ridge above town," Eli said. "The geology looks promising, and there are indicators of subsurface flow. I'd be willing to dig test holes, see what we find. No charge. I'd just need a few able-bodied men to help with the labor." Martha Brennan, seated in the front row with her faction, stood up. "This man is a vagrant who's been living on Clara Hartwell's property. We know nothing about him, nothing about his supposed expertise. Why should we trust him with something as important as our water supply?" "Because," Doc Finley said, rising from his seat, "he's offering to help, which is more than some of us can say." I vouch for Eli Morgan. He's done good work around town, hasn't caused any trouble, and seems to know what he's talking about. "I say we let him try." There was murmuring in the room, some supportive, some skeptical. Finally, Beecham spoke again. "All right, Mr. Morgan, we'll give you 2 weeks. If you find water, we'll pay you fair wages for a proper well. If you don't, you move on and stop causing talk about respectable women." Agreed. The stipulation about Clara stung, but Eli kept his expression neutral. Agreed. Clara, who'd been sitting in the back, felt a mix of gratitude and frustration. Gratitude that the council was allowing Eli to help. Frustration that even this generosity came wrapped in judgment against her. After the meeting, several men approached Eli to volunteer their labor. Among them was Tom Mitchell, the old man whose wagon Eli had fixed, and John Miller, Sarah's father. They shook Eli's hand and promised to show up the next morning ready to work. Walking back to Clara's cabin, Eli was quiet. Clara could sense his tension. "I'm sorry," she said. "Sorry that they made this about us, about me." "Don't apologize for other people's small-mindedness," Eli said. "But I'll be honest, if I don't find water, this will get worse for you. They'll say I'm a charlatan, and you're a fool for trusting me. I don't mind the talk about me, but I hate that it splashes onto you." "Then we'll find water," Clara said, with more confidence than she felt. "We'll find it, and they'll have to eat their words." Eli smiled despite himself. "That's the spirit." The next morning, Eli and his crew began work on the ridge. They started with test holes, digging down 6, 8, 10 feet in different locations, reading the soil and rock for signs of water. It was hard labor, made harder by the spring heat that had settled over the valley. Clara brought them lunch each day, sandwiches, water, coffee. She'd stay for a while, watching the work, listening to the men talk. She noticed how Eli led without commanding, how he taught without condescending. The men respected him, even those who'd been skeptical at first. Young Sarah Miller began coming to the worksite with her father. She was fascinated by the process, asking Eli endless questions about geology and water and the mountains. He answered each one seriously, treating her curiosity with respect. "Do you think we'll find water, Mr. Eli?" she asked one afternoon. "I think we have a good chance," Eli said. "The signs are promising. But sometimes, even when everything looks right, the water's just not there. That's the risk we take." "Miss Clara says you're very smart," Sarah said. "She says you know things that most people don't." Eli glanced over at Clara, who was talking with Tom Mitchell. "Miss Clara is generous in her assessment. But I've learned a few things over the years. Most important thing is to pay attention, to listen to what the land is telling you." "I want to learn that," Sarah said seriously. "I want to know how to read the land." "Then keep your eyes open and your curiosity sharp," Eli said. "The world will teach you if you're willing to learn." Clara watched this exchange with a warmth spreading through her chest. Eli was so natural with Sarah, so patient and encouraging. She thought of all the children in Red Bluff who might benefit from his attention, his teaching, thought of the family they might build together, not through birth, but through care and connection. After a week of digging, they'd found moisture but no significant water. Eli adjusted their location based on what they'd learned, moving 20 feet east and slightly upslope. They started a new hole, going deeper this time. The town watched with mixed reactions. Some hoped Eli would succeed. They needed water, and pride was less important than survival. Others, led by Martha, seemed almost eager for him to fail, as though his failure would validate their judgment of both him and Clara. On the 10th day, they hit harder rock and had to slow their progress. The hole was nearly 20 feet deep, the work exhausting. Some of the volunteers were losing faith. "Maybe this is a fool's errand," one man said during a water break. "Maybe that vagrant's just stringing us along, trying to make himself important." "Or maybe," Tom Mitchell said sharply. "He's working harder than any of us and not complaining about it." "I say we trust the process and keep digging." They kept digging. On the 12th day, with only 2 days left in the town council's deadline, Sarah fell ill. It started as a simple fever, but by evening she was worse. Doc Finley examined her and found her burning with heat, her throat swollen, her breathing labored. "It's the scarlet fever," he said grimly to John and Mary Miller. "It's going through Copper Springs. Must have come here on the supply wagon." Within 24 hours, 3 more children were sick, then 5. The illness spread with terrifying speed, and the town that had been focused on the water crisis suddenly had a more immediate threat. Doc Finley worked himself to exhaustion, moving from house to house with his black bag and his dwindling supply of medicines. The sick children needed fluids, needed to be kept cool, needed constant care. But with more falling ill every day, there weren't enough hands to help. Clara didn't hesitate. She closed the store and went to the first sick house she heard about, the Miller home, where Sarah lay pale and listless in her bed. Mary Miller opened the door, her face drawn with fear and exhaustion. "Clara," she said, surprised. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Clara said firmly. "Then tell me what you need." She worked through the day and into the night, sponging Sarah's fevered skin with cool water, coaxing her to drink, reading to her when she was awake enough to listen. Eli brought herbs from his mountain supplies, willow bark for fever, sage for infection, honey for the throat. "These helped me through a rough winter," he told Clara, showing her how to prepare them. "They're not miracle cures, but they can ease suffering and support healing." Doc Finley gratefully accepted the herbs and began using them with all the sick children. Between his medical knowledge and Eli's practical remedies, they gave the children the best care available. But the illness kept spreading. By the end of the 2nd day, 12 children were sick, and on the 3rd morning, the town well ran completely dry. Pete Jennings made the announcement with a stricken face. "We're out," he said. "The well gave its last water an hour ago." Panic rippled through Red Bluff. Water was needed more than ever now, for the sick children and for basic survival. The nearest water source was 10 miles away, too far to haul enough for everyone's needs. The town council called an emergency meeting. The church hall was packed with frightened, angry people. Richard Beecham tried to maintain order, but voices kept rising, accusations flying. "This is judgment on the town," someone shouted. "Judgment for allowing sin to flourish among us." Eyes turned to Clara, who stood at the back next to Eli. The implication was clear. She was the sin they meant. Eli stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "Listen to me," he said, not shouting, but commanding attention nonetheless. "We have a crisis. Your children are sick, your well is dry, and you're wasting time pointing fingers. I've been digging on that ridge for 12 days. We haven't hit water yet, but we're close. I can feel it. Give me 3 more days. Give me the strongest diggers you have, and we'll work day and night. If I'm wrong, I'll leave and never come back. But if I'm right, you'll have water. Your children will survive. This town will survive. And what about the cost?" Someone called out. "You said you'd do this for free, but now you're demanding more time, more labor." "I'm not demanding anything," Eli said. "I'm offering. The work is free. The water, if we find it, is free. All I'm asking is that you let me try to save your children's lives." The hall fell silent. Then John Miller stood, his face haggard from sleepless nights at Sarah's bedside. "My daughter is sick. If there's any chance Eli can find water that will help her, I'm willing to dig until my hands bleed. Who's with me?" Slowly, men began standing. Tom Mitchell, the baker, whose grandson was ill, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher. One by one, they committed to the effort. Martha Brennan stood as well, but her words were different. "This is foolishness. We should send wagons to Copper Springs for water, not waste precious energy on a hopeless dream. And we certainly shouldn't be trusting our town's survival to a vagrant and a barren woman who—" "Enough." Doc Finley's voice, usually so gentle, cracked like a whip. "Martha, you've had your say for 7 years. It's time someone else spoke. Clara Hartwell has been in every sick house in this town for the past 3 days. She's held children while they cried, comforted parents, worked herself to exhaustion helping others." Eli Morgan has given us herbs that are easing suffering and maybe saving lives. They've shown more Christian charity than you've shown in years of church leadership. So sit down, be quiet, and let the decent people do their work. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Martha Brennan had no response. She sat down, her face mottled with rage and shame. The council voted. Eli would have 3 more days. All available men would help dig. Wagons would also be sent to Copper Springs as a backup, but the primary effort would focus on the well. As people filed out of the church, several women approached Clara. They were mothers of sick children, and their faces showed exhaustion and something else, gratitude and maybe the beginning of shame. "Thank you," Mary Miller said simply, taking Clara's hands. "Thank you for helping Sarah, for helping all of them." "We're neighbors," Clara said. "That's what neighbors do." That night, Clara and Eli sat on her porch, both too tired to speak much. They'd worked through another round of caring for the sick children before heading home. Clara's hands were raw from wringing out cool cloths, her voice hoarse from reading stories and singing lullabies. 3 more days, Eli said quietly. "That's all I have. If we don't find water by then, I'll have failed them." "Failed you? You haven't failed anyone," Clara said. "You're trying. You're working yourself to exhaustion for people who've treated both of us terribly. That's not failure. That's grace." Eli pulled something from his pocket, the small wooden cross. He held it in his palm, the grain of the wood visible even in the dim light. "I carved this when I was at my lowest," he said, "when I couldn't see any reason to keep going. It reminded me that faith isn't about certainty. It's about showing up and doing the work even when you don't know if it will matter." He held the cross out to Clara. "I want you to have this, not because I'm giving up, but because you've already shown more faith than I ever managed. You've kept going, kept your dignity, kept your kindness, even when this town gave you every reason to become bitter. That's real faith. That's real strength." Clara took the cross, feeling its smoothness, its weight. "I can't take this. It's too important to you. That's why I'm giving it to you," Eli said. "The important things, those are the ones we share. Keep it while I dig. And if we find water, you can give it back. If we don't, keep it to remember that we tried our best and that trying matters." Clara held the cross against her heart, tears streaming down her face. "We'll find it," she whispered. "We have to." Eli kissed her forehead gently, a tender gesture that spoke of promises he wasn't yet ready to make in words. Then he walked back to his camp, leaving Clara on the porch with the wooden cross and a heart full of hope and fear in equal measure. Inside, she placed the cross on her bedside table next to her prayer book. She opened the book and wrote, "Tomorrow we dig for water and for our future. God help us find both." She didn't press a flower this time. Some prayers needed to remain open, unfinished, their answers still being written in sweat and determination, and the stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. In his camp, Eli lay beneath the stars and made his own prayer. Not for success, though he wanted that desperately, but for the strength to keep trying, keep digging, keep hoping, even if the water never came. For the courage to face whatever tomorrow brought. And for Clara, that whatever happened, she'd know she was loved and valued and worthy of every good thing this world could offer. The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead. And in the sick houses of Red Bluff, children tossed in fevered dreams while their parents kept vigil, hoping and praying that the morning would bring water, healing, and the end of their crisis. 3 days stretched ahead, full of possibility and danger. 3 days to find water or face defeat. 3 days for a town to learn what it truly meant to come together in crisis, or to let fear and judgment tear them apart. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was only the darkness, the stars, and 2 people holding on to hope with everything they had. The sun rose on the 13th day of digging with merciless heat. Eli was at the worksite before dawn, organizing the crew of volunteers. The hole they'd been digging was now nearly 25 feet deep, the sides shored up with timber to prevent collapse. Getting in and out required a rope ladder, and hauling dirt up required a pulley system they'd rigged from spare lumber. Clara arrived as the men were preparing to descend. She'd been up most of the night with the sick children. Sarah's fever had finally broken, but 2 of the other children were worse, and a new case had been reported. Doc Finley's face showed the strain of too many patients and not enough medicine. "How is she?" Eli asked, meaning Sarah. "Sleeping peacefully," Clara said. "Her fever broke around 3 this morning. Doc thinks she's past the worst of it." Relief flooded Eli's features. "Thank God. And the others?" "Fighting," Clara said simply. "They're fighting, and we're fighting with them." The work began in earnest. Eli went down into the hole with 2 other men, and they attacked the earth with picks and shovels. The deeper they went, the harder the soil became, mixed with rock that had to be broken apart piece by piece. The temperature at the bottom was cooler, but the work was crushing. Every half hour they'd rotate, fresh men going down, exhausted ones coming up to rest. Clara organized the support efforts. She brought water from her private well, rationing it carefully, but making sure the diggers stayed hydrated. She brought food at midday. She kept track of who'd worked which shifts, making sure no one overexerted themselves. By mid-afternoon, they'd gone another 3 feet down. Still no water, just damp soil that hinted at moisture somewhere below, but gave up nothing. As the sun lowered, more townspeople gathered to watch. Some came to help, taking shifts at the rope hauling dirt up. Others came to see if the madman from the mountains would actually find water, or if this whole effort was folly. Martha Brennan was among the watchers, her face set in lines of grim satisfaction, as though she'd already decided this would fail and was simply waiting for confirmation. On the 14th day, Eli woke before dawn, after 3 hours of fitful sleep. His hands were blistered, his back screaming with pain, his shoulders burning from the repetitive motion of swinging the pick. But the work was everything now. He descended into the hole, while stars still showed in the strip of sky visible from the bottom. The soil was different here, darker and heavy with moisture. He could smell it now, the mineral scent of water close by. But close might mean 6 inches or 6 feet, and they were running out of time. Tom Mitchell came down to join him, and they worked in silence. The rhythm of pick and shovel like a prayer made physical. Dig, lift, throw, repeat. The pile of earth at the surface grew steadily, hauled up by men working the pulley. At noon, John Miller came to the edge of the hole. "Eli," he called down, "the council wants an update. They're asking if you found anything." "Tell them we're close," Eli called back. "The soil is right. The moisture is here. We just need more time." "You have until sunset tomorrow," John said. "That's the word from Beecham. Sunset on the 15th day, or they're calling it and sending all efforts to the Copper Springs run." Eli nodded, though inside he felt the weight of that deadline like a stone. 30 hours. They had 30 hours to find water or admit defeat. Clara brought lunch, climbing partway down the ladder to hand food to the men at the bottom. Her face was grey with exhaustion. She'd been at the sick houses again all night, but her eyes met Eli's with fierce determination. "Don't give up," she said quietly. "I can feel it. The water's here." "I pray you're right," Eli said. The afternoon wore on. They went another foot down, then another. The soil was saturated now, muddy and heavy. But there was no flow, no spring bubbling up. Just damp earth that clung to their tools and made every stroke harder. As darkness fell, Eli called a halt. The men climbed out, exhausted beyond words. Eli came up last, his clothes caked with mud, his hands bleeding from broken blisters. "Same time tomorrow," he said to the crew. "We'll hit it tomorrow." "I know we will." But he saw doubt in their faces. They were good men who'd worked themselves raw for this effort, but they were losing faith, and he couldn't blame them. That night, Clara insisted Eli come to her cabin. She heated water and made him wash, then tended to his hands with salve and clean bandages. He was too tired to protest, too tired to worry about what people might say. "You need to rest," she said gently. "You're killing yourself with this effort." "If I don't find that water," Eli said, "those children might die. You might lose your store. The town will suffer. I have to keep trying." "And if you don't find it?" Clara asked. "Will you blame yourself? Carry that guilt along with all the others?" Eli looked at her with haunted eyes. I've failed at the most important things in my life, Clara. My wife and baby died because doctors wouldn't help us. I couldn't save them. If I can't save these children, if I can't do this one thing that might actually matter. Clara took his face in her hands. Listen to me, Eli Morgan. You didn't fail your wife. Cruel people failed her. A broken system failed her. You loved her, and that's what mattered. And you're not failing these children. You're working yourself to death, trying to save them. That's not failure. That's love. Tears tracked through the dirt on Eli's face. I'm so tired, Clara, tired of carrying all this weight, tired of feeling like I'm not enough. You are enough, Clara said fiercely. You are more than enough. And tomorrow, whether we find water or not, that will still be true. She held him while he cried, his body shaking with exhaustion and emotion. And when the storm passed, she led him to her bed, not for passion but for comfort. They lay together fully clothed, her arms around him, and he fell into the deep sleep of complete exhaustion. Clara lay awake, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers. She'd spent 7 years believing she was incomplete, that there was something fundamentally wrong with her. But holding Eli now, offering him the comfort he so desperately needed, she realized something profound. Maybe being barren didn't mean she couldn't give life. Maybe it meant she gave life differently, through care, through comfort, through the kind of love that sustained and healed. She couldn't give birth to children, but she could help raise them, as she'd been doing with Sarah and the others. She couldn't create life, but she could nurture it in 1,000 different ways. The wooden cross sat on her bedside table, catching the moonlight through her window. She reached out and touched it, feeling its smooth grain, and she understood why Eli had carved it. Sometimes faith was just about continuing to exist, continuing to care, even when everything hurt and nothing made sense. We'll find that water, she whispered into the darkness. We'll find it, and we'll prove to this town that strength comes in many forms, that worth isn't measured by what you can produce, but by what you give freely even when you have nothing left. She closed her eyes and finally slept, her arms still around Eli, their breathing synchronized. 2 wounded people finding shelter in each other's presence. The 15th day dawned clear and hot. Eli woke at first light, Clara's arms still around him. For a moment, he let himself simply feel the warmth of her, the safety of her presence. Then he carefully extracted himself and headed to the worksite. The morning shift was already gathering. Word had spread that this was the last day, and more people had come to watch. Some to support, others to witness what they assumed would be failure. The atmosphere was tense, expectant. Eli descended into the hole. It was deeper than his height now, the walls pressing close. The air was cool and damp, and he could hear water somewhere. A subtle sound, more felt than heard. He positioned himself at the bottom and raised his pick. "This is it," he said to Tom Mitchell, who'd come down with him. "Today we find it or we don't, but we give it everything we have." They began to dig. An hour passed. 2, 3. The sun climbed higher, and the heat at the surface became oppressive. But in the hole, Eli and the rotating crew kept working. The soil was mud now, thick and heavy. They were standing in water-saturated earth, but there was still no flow. At noon, Clara arrived with food and water. Eli climbed up for a brief rest, and she pulled him aside. "Sarah wants to see you," she said. "She's well enough to walk, and she's asking for Mr. Eli. She wants to thank you for the herbs." "I should stay here," Eli said. "We're so close." "5 minutes," Clara said. "She's been asking for an hour, please." Eli nodded and followed Clara to the Miller house. Sarah was sitting in a chair on the porch, pale and thin, but smiling. When she saw Eli, her face lit up. "Mr. Eli," she called. "You saved my life. Mama said your herbs helped me get better." Eli knelt beside her chair, taking her small hand in his. "You saved yourself by being strong, Sarah. The herbs just gave you a little help. Are you going to find the water?" she asked. "Papa says you're digging really deep." "I'm trying my best," Eli said honestly. "Sometimes even when you try your hardest, things don't work out the way you hope. But that doesn't mean trying wasn't worth it." Sarah considered this, her young face serious. "Miss Clara says that doing good is more important than having good things happen." She says that's what real faith means. Eli looked up at Clara, who stood on the porch watching them. Their eyes met, and he saw in her face everything he needed to see: belief, support, love. "Miss Clara is very wise," he said to Sarah. "You should listen to everything she teaches you." He stood, kissed Sarah's forehead gently, and headed back to the dig site. But something had shifted in him. The frantic edge of desperation had eased, replaced by a calmer determination. Whether they found water or not, he'd done his best. He'd shown up. He'd tried. That had to count for something. The afternoon stretched long and hot. At the work site, the crowd had grown larger. Nearly half the town was there now, watching and waiting. The atmosphere was charged, almost electric. Eli went back down into the hole for what he knew would be his final shift. The sun would set in 3 hours. If they hadn't found water by then, it was over. He attacked the earth with renewed energy, the pick biting deep into the saturated soil. Beside him, John Miller worked with equal intensity. They were both thinking of Sarah, of all the children who'd been sick, of what this water could mean. An hour passed. The pile of muddy earth at the surface grew. Eli's arms burned with exhaustion, but he kept swinging the pick, kept digging. Then, on what felt like his 1,000th swing, the pick broke through something. Instead of hitting more soil, it punched into empty space. Water began seeping into the hole around his feet, not a trickle, but a steady flow. "John," Eli said quietly, "I think we got it." They dug more carefully now, widening the opening. The water flowed faster, rising quickly around their ankles, their calves. They could hear it now, the sound of water moving through rock, finding its release. "Pull us up!" Eli shouted. "We hit it! We've got water!" The words rippled through the crowd like electricity. Hens grabbed the ropes, hauling Eli and John up quickly. As they emerged from the hole, water was already visible at the bottom, rising steadily. A cheer went up from the gathered crowd. Men slapped Eli on the back, shook his hand. Women wept with relief. Children danced and shouted. Clara pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Eli, not caring who saw, not caring what they thought. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Eli corrected. "All of us, together." The water continued to rise in the hole, clear and cold and pure. By sunset, it was 3 feet deep and still coming. The town had its water. The children would survive. Red Bluff had been saved by the work of people who'd refused to give up. That night, as the celebration continued in town, Eli and Clara stood on the ridge where this had all begun, watching the last light fade from the sky. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now?" Eli said, pulling her close. "Now we figure out what our life looks like." "Because I'm not going anywhere, Clara Hartwell. I found my water, and I found my home. And they're both right here in Red Bluff." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, the silver thimble that had belonged to his wife Anna. He held it in his palm, the metal catching the last rays of sunlight. "Anna made beautiful things with her hands," Eli said quietly. "Quilts and embroidered pillowcases, things of grace and beauty. This thimble saw her through thousands of stitches, millions probably. I've carried it since she died, a reminder of what I lost." He held it out to Clara. "But I think she'd want you to have it. Not to replace her, no one could do that. But because you're someone who also creates beauty and grace, just in different ways. Because I'm ready to start building something new, and I want to build it with you." Clara took the thimble with trembling hands. It was small and worn, marked by years of use, precious beyond measure. "Are you asking me to marry you, Eli Morgan?" she said softly. "I am," Eli said. "I'm asking you to take a chance on a mountain man with a difficult past and an uncertain future. I'm asking you to build a life with me right here in this town that's been so hard on both of us. I'm asking because I love you, Clara, because you've shown me that second chances are real and that broken people can find healing together." "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes to all of it." They kissed as the stars began appearing overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their separate griefs and were now witnessing their shared joy. And somewhere in the mountains, perhaps, Anna's spirit smiled, knowing that the man she'd loved had finally found his way back to life and love. The thimble sat warm in Clara's palm, a bridge between past and future, between loss and renewal. And the wooden cross, which Eli had given to Clara and which she now returned to him, would find a place of honor in their home, not as a symbol of suffering, but as a reminder that faith sometimes means simply continuing to love, even when love seems impossible. Red Bluff had its water. Clara had her love. And Eli had found that belonging he'd been searching for since the day Anna died. Not in isolation, not in the mountains, but here among imperfect people, doing the hard work of building community and family in the face of judgment and hardship. The well would be properly constructed in the days to come, with timber and stone, and all the engineering required to make it safe and lasting. But the real well had already been dug. The one that tapped into something deeper than water, into the human capacity for redemption, for growth, for becoming more than the labels others applied. Clara and Eli walked down from the ridge, hand in hand, the thimble tucked safely in Clara's pocket, ready to face whatever came next. Together, the news of the engagement spread through Red Bluff faster than the scarlet fever had. Some people were genuinely happy. The families whose children had been saved, the men who'd dug alongside Eli, Doc Finley and Mrs. Chen and the others who'd maintained their humanity when judgment was easier. But Martha Brennan's faction was apoplectic. A barren woman marrying a vagrant mountain man. It flew in the face of everything they believed about proper society, about God's order, about who deserved happiness. Martha herself appeared at Clara's store the day after the engagement was announced. She swept in like a storm, her face rigid with righteous fury. "Clara Hartwell," she said, "you are making a mockery of this town and of Christian values. This man is beneath you. This marriage is unseemly. I'm here as a representative of the Ladies' Auxiliary to tell you that if you go through with this, you will be formally shunned by decent society." Clara, who was restocking shelves, didn't even turn around. "Martha," she said calmly, "decent society shunned me 7 years ago. You'll forgive me if your threat carries no weight. This is about more than just you," Martha pressed. "This is about the standards we maintain. If we allow this marriage, what's next? People marrying Indians? Chinese? Where does it end?" Now Clara did turn around, and something in her expression made Martha take a step back. "Eli Morgan dug for 15 days to save this town's children," Clara said quietly. "He worked until his hands bled and his back broke. He asked for nothing in return. He gave us water and hope and a future. And you want to judge his worth by his bank account and his residence? You want to measure him against your narrow standards of respectability? I'm measuring him against God's word." "No," Clara interrupted. "You're measuring him against your comfort, your need to feel superior to someone. Your fear that if people like Eli and me can find happiness despite your judgment, then maybe your judgment doesn't matter as much as you thought. And that terrifies you." Martha's face flushed crimson. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm done caring what you think," Clara said. "For 7 years, I've lived under your shadow, letting your opinions shape my life. But I'm finished. Eli and I are getting married. We're building a life together. And if you can't be happy for us, at least have the decency to leave us alone." Martha opened her mouth, closed it, then turned on her heel and stormed out, the bell above the door chiming sharply in her wake. Doc Finley, who'd been browsing in the back and had heard everything, emerged with a grin on his weathered face. "Well said, Clara," he told her. "About 10 years overdue, but well said nonetheless." Clara found she was shaking, but it was the good kind of shaking. The release of long-held tension, the physical manifestation of finally standing up for herself. "I meant every word," she said. "I know you did," Doc said. "And it's about time." That evening Clara told Eli about the confrontation. They were at her cabin, planning their wedding. A simple ceremony, just close friends, probably performed by Doc since the Presbyterian minister would almost certainly refuse. "I'm sorry," Eli said. "Sorry that loving me brings you more grief." "Don't you dare apologize," Clara said fiercely. "Loving you is the best thing I've done in years." Martha's opinions are her problem, not ours. Still, Eli said, I wonder if we should leave Red Bluff. Start fresh somewhere else where people don't have all these preconceptions. Clara considered this seriously. We could, she said, but I don't want to. This is my home. My father built this store. My mother is buried here. My life is here. I'm not going to let Martha Brennan run me off my own land. Then we stay, Eli said. We build our life here, and we do it so well that eventually even the skeptics have to admit we're making it work. Over the following weeks, preparations began for both the wedding and the permanent well. The town council, under pressure from grateful families and more moderate voices, granted Eli a small plot of land near Clara's property and paid him handsomely for finding the water. He used that money to buy materials to expand Clara's cabin and to purchase proper tools for his trade. It turned out that Eli had skills the town needed: carpentry, blacksmithing, water management. He began taking jobs, building a reputation as a reliable craftsman. The sign outside Clara's store was repainted to read Hartwell and Morgan General Store, even though they weren't married yet. It was a declaration, a public statement that they were partners in every sense. Sarah Miller, fully recovered from her illness, became a regular visitor to the store. She'd help Clara with small tasks and pepper Eli with questions when he stopped by. She was bright and curious, hungry for knowledge and attention. One afternoon, Clara watched Sarah and Eli discussing the properties of different types of wood for construction. The girl was completely absorbed, her young face serious as she examined the grain of a pine plank. She's like a daughter to you already, Clara said quietly to Eli that evening. She's a good kid, Eli said. Smart as a whip and kind despite everything she's been through. There are other children like her in Red Bluff, Clara said carefully. Children who need guidance, who need someone to believe in them. Eli looked at her, understanding dawning. You're thinking about the life we'll build together. I am, Clara said. I spent so many years grieving for the children I'd never have, but maybe that grief was misdirected. Maybe I was meant to help raise other people's children, to be the person who sees them, encourages them, gives them a safe place to learn and grow. A teacher, Eli said. Not formally, Clara said. But yes, in a way. And you could teach too, practical skills, how to read the land, how to build things. We could make our home a place where children know they're welcome. Eli pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. That sounds like a beautiful life, he said. Different from what either of us planned, but maybe better for being unexpected. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in June, 8 weeks after Eli had ridden into town. Doc Finley agreed to perform the ceremony, which would take place at Clara's cabin, their cabin now, with Eli's additions making it larger and more comfortable. The guest list was small. Doc Finley, Mrs. Chen, Tom Mitchell and his wife, the Millers and several other families whose children had been saved. Perhaps 30 people total, but each one chosen because they'd shown kindness or fairness when it would have been easier to follow Martha Brennan's lead. The morning of the wedding, Clara woke early and took out her mother's wedding ring from the chain around her neck. She held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight, and spoke quietly to the mother she'd lost so many years ago. I wish you could be here, she said. I wish you could meet him. I think you'd like him, Mama. He's kind and strong, and he sees me the way Papa saw you, as someone whole and worthy and valuable. I'm scared, but I'm also happier than I've been in years. I hope that's all right. I hope you'd be proud of the woman I've become. She put the ring back on its chain, then opened her prayer book. The pages were full of pressed flowers now, each one marking a prayer, a moment, a step on the journey that had brought her here. The columbine from years ago, brittle and faded. The prairie roses from the summer she'd stopped believing. The forget-me-nots from the spring she'd met Eli. And the mountain thyme, still fragrant, still full of life. She turned to a fresh page and wrote in careful script, Today I marry Eli Morgan. Today I choose joy over grief, hope over resignation, love over loneliness. Thank you, God, for bringing me through the wilderness to this moment. Help me to be worthy of it. She pressed a single wildflower between the pages, a pink bitterroot, Montana's state flower, which Eli had picked for her that morning. Then she closed the book and prepared for her wedding. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Clara wore a dress of pale blue calico that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew. Eli wore new trousers and a white shirt, his hair trimmed neat, his beard shaped close to his jaw. They stood on the porch of their cabin, with the mountains visible in the distance and the creek running its endless song at the property's edge. Doc Finley spoke words about love and partnership, about two people choosing to face life's challenges together. Then he asked them to make their vows. Eli went first, taking Clara's hands in his. "Clara, I came to Red Bluff looking for supplies and maybe a few days' rest. I found something infinitely more valuable. I found you. You've taught me that it's possible to carry grief without letting it destroy you, to maintain grace under pressure, to be strong in the ways that truly matter. I promise to love you, to support you, to see you always as the remarkable woman you are. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and our future. I promise to be the partner you deserve." Clara's voice was steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "Eli, you saw me when I'd become invisible to myself. You reminded me that my worth isn't measured by other people's narrow definitions of success. You showed me that love can grow even in the hardest soil, that hope can survive even the darkest nights. I promise to love you with all my heart. I promise to honor the memory of Anna and the love you shared, while building something new together. I promise to face whatever comes with courage and faith, knowing that we're stronger together than either of us could ever be alone." They exchanged rings, Clara's mother's gold band for her, a simple silver band that Clara had bought with her own money for him. And then Doc Finley pronounced them married, and they kissed while their small gathering of friends cheered and clapped. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Mrs. Chen had made dumplings, Tom Mitchell brought venison, the Millers contributed a cake that Sarah had helped frost. People ate and talked and laughed, and for a few hours, Red Bluff felt like the community it had always claimed to be, people caring for each other, celebrating together, putting aside judgment to share in joy. As the sun lowered toward the mountains, casting everything in golden light, Sarah approached Clara and Eli with something wrapped in cloth. "Miss Clara, Mr. Eli," she said shyly, "I made you a wedding present. It's not much, but I wanted to give you something." She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small wooden box with a carved lid. The carving was amateur but earnest, two pine trees standing close together, their branches intertwined. "I tried to carve it like Mr. Eli taught me," Sarah said. "He showed me how to see the shape in the wood and just help it come out. The trees are supposed to be you, standing together, growing together." Clara knelt down and hugged the girl fiercely. "It's perfect, Sarah, absolutely perfect." "We'll treasure it always," Eli said, his voice rough with emotion. As the guests began to leave, offering final congratulations and well wishes, Clara and Eli stood together, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. They were husband and wife now, their lives officially joined, their future opening before them. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, leaning against Eli's shoulder. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," Eli said. "How the things we think will destroy us sometimes lead us to exactly where we need to be. If Anna hadn't died, I never would have gone to the mountains. If I hadn't gone to the mountains, I never would have learned to find water. If I hadn't learned to find water, I never would have come to Red Bluff when the town needed help. And if I hadn't come to Red Bluff, I never would have met you. So all that pain had purpose?" Clara asked. "Maybe," Eli said. "Or maybe we're just good at making meaning out of what we've suffered. Either way, I'm grateful we found each other." "So am I," Clara said. They went inside their cabin, their home, and closed the door on the world. Inside, the lamp burned warm, casting gentle light on their simple furniture, their few possessions, the life they were building together. On the mantel sat Sarah's carved box, the wooden cross, and Clara's prayer book, symbols of their journey and their faith. That night, they made love for the first time, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and patience. There was grief woven through the joy. There would always be grief, the ghosts of Thomas and Anna present in gentle ways. But there was also hope and healing and the profound relief of being truly seen and truly loved. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Clara's head on Eli's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was so afraid I'd die alone," Clara whispered, "that I'd live my whole life being defined by what I couldn't give rather than what I could." "You give more than most people ever do," Eli said. "Kindness, care, attention, grace, those are the things that make life worth living. Children are a gift, but they're not the only gift. And they're not the measure of a person's worth. I know that now," Clara said. "You helped me know that." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, two people who'd found home not in a place, but in each other's presence. And outside, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns. Red Bluff slept beneath their light, and the new well flowed steadily, providing life-giving water to a town that had almost let thirst destroy it. The summer months passed in a haze of work and growing contentment. Eli expanded his carpentry business, building furniture and doing repairs around town. Clara ran the store, which saw increased business as word spread that the prices were fair and the service honest. Together, they developed a reputation for integrity and hard work. The sign reading Hartwell and Morgan General Store became a symbol of something larger, a statement that partnership and mutual respect could build something stronger than individual effort alone. Children began appearing at their home with increasing frequency. Sarah was still the most regular visitor, but others came too. Boys wanting to learn woodworking from Eli, girls interested in the herbs and medicines Clara was learning to prepare. The Morgan's cabin became an unofficial schoolhouse for practical knowledge, a place where questions were encouraged and curiosity rewarded. One evening, as half a dozen children sat on their porch, learning to identify plants by their leaves and flowers, Clara caught Eli's eye and smiled. He smiled back, understanding passing between them without words. This was their family, not conventional, not what either had imagined, but real and valuable and full of love. Martha Brennan never apologized, never softened her stance. She maintained her judgment, her certainty that Clara and Eli were living in sin despite their marriage, that their influence was corrupting the town's youth. But her faction had shrunk considerably. Even those who'd followed her lead for years began to question whether her version of Christianity, so focused on judgment and exclusion, was really what their faith demanded. The shift was gradual but undeniable. People who'd crossed the street to avoid Clara now nodded in greeting. Mothers whose children learned from Eli brought pies and preserves as thanks. The town was healing, slowly learning that worth came in many forms and that rigid definitions of acceptable life paths did more harm than good. 3 months after the wedding, Clara made an announcement that surprised even herself. At a town council meeting called to discuss water management for the growing community, she stood and proposed the creation of a formal school. "We have children growing up without access to regular education," she said. "Many families can't spare their children for the full day of lessons, but they could manage a few hours. I'm proposing a school that meets 3 afternoons a week, teaching practical skills alongside reading and arithmetic. Eli has offered to teach carpentry, land management, and basic engineering. I'll teach reading, writing, and household management. We'll do it at no cost to families, funded by donations and our own resources." The proposal was met with mixed reactions, but the families who'd benefited from Clara and Eli's informal teaching spoke up in support. After some debate, the council approved the plan, with the understanding that it would be a trial program reassessed after 6 months. The school began in September, meeting in the expanded cabin on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday afternoons. 15 children showed up the first day, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Clara taught reading and writing using whatever books she could gather. Eli taught practical mathematics through carpentry projects and water management calculations. Sarah Miller flourished in this environment. She proved to have a gift for numbers and an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. Clara began teaching her bookkeeping and accounting, while Eli showed her surveying and engineering principles. The girl absorbed everything like dry earth soaking up rain. She could go far, Eli said one evening after Sarah had left, having spent an extra hour working through a particularly complex calculation. With the right opportunities, she could be an engineer, a teacher, maybe even go to university. Her parents don't have money for that, Clara said. Maybe not now, Eli said. But maybe we could help. Save up, set aside funds for promising students who want to continue their education. Make it our mission to help children reach their potential. Clara looked at her husband with renewed love. You're talking about building a legacy. I'm talking about giving meaning to what we've survived, Eli said. About turning our pain into purpose. That night, they discussed the idea seriously. They could live simply, save money, create a fund for children like Sarah, who showed promise but lacked resources. It wouldn't be much at first, but over years it could grow. It could become something that outlasted them, something that proved their lives had mattered. They called it the Morgan Hartwell Education Fund, and they told no one about it except Doc Finley, who agreed to serve as trustee. The first contribution was $50, a significant portion of their savings, but an investment in the future they wanted to help build. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Clara stood at her store counter one quiet afternoon and realized something profound. She was happy, not in spite of her past, but because of everything that past had taught her. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer defined her. She'd transformed it into something generative, something that helped others. She touched the small wooden box Sarah had carved for their wedding, which now sat on the store counter as a reminder of what mattered most. Then she opened her prayer book to write a new entry. But for the first time in years, she found herself at a loss for words. How did you thank God for answered prayers when the answer looked nothing like what you'd requested? When barrenness had been transformed not into fertility, but into a different kind of fruitfulness. Finally, she wrote simply, "Thank you for the wilderness. Thank you for the journey. Thank you for Eli. Thank you for showing me that there are many ways to give life." She pressed no flower this time. The prayer was complete, the petition answered. The rest of the pages would be for new prayers, new hopes, new chapters in a story that was still being written. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting warm light on shelves of goods and the careful records of an honest business. Children's laughter drifted from somewhere down the street. A mother pushed a pram past the store, her baby sleeping peacefully. Life continued its endless cycle, and Clara was part of it. Not in the way she'd once imagined, but in a way that felt true and right and deeply meaningful. When Eli arrived to walk her home for supper, she locked the store and took his arm, and they strolled through the town that had once rejected her but was slowly, grudgingly learning to accept that worth came in unexpected forms. "Happy?" Eli asked, though he could see the answer in her face. "More than I ever thought possible," Clara said honestly. And it was true. Against all odds, despite 7 years of judgment and grief, she'd found her way to joy. Not the joy she'd prayed for, but a deeper, more complex joy built on genuine partnership, meaningful work, and the knowledge that her life was making a difference. The mountains glowed in the distance, those same mountains where Eli had spent 8 years in isolation, learning the hard lessons that had prepared him to be the partner Clara needed. The sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, painting the valley in colors that no artist could fully capture. And two people who'd been broken separately discovered that together they could be whole. That night, as they lay in bed with the window open to the cool autumn air, Clara told Eli about the education fund entry in her prayer book. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked. "Focusing on other people's children instead of nothing." Eli interrupted gently. "Clara, we don't have children. That's just a fact, neither good nor bad in itself. What matters is what we do with our lives, how we spend our time and energy and love. And helping children like Sarah reach their potential, that's as valuable as anything else we could do." "I wish I'd understood that sooner," Clara said. "I wasted so many years grieving for something I was never going to have." "You didn't waste those years," Eli said. "You survived them. You maintained your grace and kindness despite cruelty and judgment. That takes strength that most people never develop. And that strength is exactly what makes you able to help others now. Clara absorbed this, feeling something settle in her chest. A deep acceptance she'd been moving toward for months, but could now finally embrace completely. "I'm not barren," she said quietly. "I never was. I was just fertile in ways this town couldn't recognize." "Exactly," Eli said, kissing her forehead. "You've given birth to hope, to possibility, to a different way of being in the world. That's more valuable than most people accomplish in a lifetime." They fell asleep holding each other, the cool night air carrying the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Tomorrow, they'd wake and do the work they'd chosen, running the store, teaching the children, building the life they'd designed together. It was simple work, honest work, the kind that built communities and strengthened bonds. And in the years to come, when Sarah Miller became the first woman from Red Bluff to attend university, when other children followed the paths of learning that Clara and Eli had opened for them, when the Morgan Hartwell Education Fund grew large enough to change lives, the town would remember this time. They'd remember how a woman they'd called Barren proved to be one of the most fruitful people among them. How a mountain man they'd dismissed as a vagrant became one of their most valued citizens. How love and partnership and determination had transformed not just two lives, but an entire community. But that was still to come. For now, there was just this moment. Two people sleeping peacefully in their cabin, their future unfolding day by day, their past informing, but no longer imprisoning them. Outside, the stars turned in their slow dance across the sky. Red Bluff slept beneath their light, and the well Eli had dug flowed steadily, providing water for a town that had learned, slowly and painfully, that miracles sometimes came in unexpected forms. The town had laughed at the woman they called Barren, had dismissed the mountain man who'd ridden down from the high country. But in the end, those two people had saved Red Bluff, not just with water, but with a demonstration of how to live with grace, how to love despite judgment, how to build meaning from suffering. And that, Clara thought as she drifted towards sleep with Eli's arms around her, was more valuable than any conventional blessing could ever be. They'd written their own story, and it was beautiful,